The crack of a gunshot shattered the night, freezing the blood in Maya Anderson's veins. Her eyes locked with her twin sister Michelle's, a silent conversation passing between them in that split second of terror. This wasn't how their evening was supposed to end. Merely hours ago, they had been sharing a quiet dinner with their elderly mother in the old neighborhood. Now, they found themselves trapped in a nightmarish scene, facing the barrel of a police officer's gun in a dimly lit alley. "Don't move!" Officer Brennan bellowed, his weapon trained on Maya's chest. His partner, Officer Rourke, had Michelle pinned against their patrol car, the cold metal of handcuffs already biting into her wrists. Maya's heart pounded like a war drum, her lawyer's mind racing to make sense of the situation. "Officer, please," she began, her voice steadier than she felt. "There's been a terrible mistake." "Shut it!" Rourke snarled, twisting Michelle's arm harder. A small gasp of pain escaped her lips, and something snapped inside Maya. In that moment, standing in the harsh glare of police lights, Maya made a decision that would change everything. She slowly raised her hands, palms out, and spoke words that would set in motion a chain of events that would shake the city to its core. "My name is Maya Anderson. I'm the district attorney for this county, and you're about to make the biggest mistake of your lives." The alley fell silent, save for the crackle of the police radio and the distant wail of sirens. Officer Brennan's gun wavered, uncertainty creeping into his eyes. But Rourke wasn't backing down. "Nice try, sweetheart," he sneered, tightening his grip on Michelle. "And let me guess, your sister here is the mayor?" A small, dangerous smile played on Michelle's lips. "Not quite," she said, her voice calm despite the circumstances. "Supreme Court Judge Michelle Anderson. Pleased to make your acquaintance, officer." The color drained from Brennan's face, his gun lowering slightly. But Rourke's features contorted with rage. "You expect us to believe that?" he spat. "Two black women dressed like that, in this neighborhood? You fit the description of suspects in an armed robbery. Now, you're coming with us, and we'll sort this out at the station."
Oh.
As Rourke moved to grab Maya, she stood her ground, years of courtroom battles evident in her unwavering stance. "Officer," she said, her voice low and charged with promise, "I strongly advise you to reconsider your actions. Every second of this encounter is being recorded."
Oh.
She nodded towards a small device clipped to her lapel. A personal body camera, standard issue for the DA's office. Rourke's eyes widened, realizing the gravity of the situation. But it was too late. The damage was done. As if on cue, the alley was suddenly flooded with light. News vans screeched to a halt at both ends of the narrow street, reporters and cameramen spilling out, drawn by the police scanner chatter of a high-profile arrest. Maya and Michelle exchanged a look. In that glance was a lifetime of shared struggles, of fights against a system that had tried to hold them back at every turn. They had clawed their way up from this very neighborhood, armed with nothing but their intellects and an unshakable belief in justice. Now, that same system had brought them full circle, reminding them that no matter how high they climbed, they were still seen as suspects first, citizens second. As the cameras started rolling and microphones were thrust towards them, Maya took a deep breath. This wasn't just about them anymore. This was their chance to expose the rot at the heart of the system they had devoted their lives to upholding. "My name is Maya Anderson," she began, her voice ringing clear and strong, carrying to every camera and microphone. "And what you are witnessing is a gross miscarriage of justice. Tonight, my sister and I—" As Maya spoke, Michelle stood tall beside her, the handcuffs glinting in the camera lights, a stark symbol of the battle they were about to wage. Little did the sisters know, but this night would be the catalyst for a movement that would sweep across the nation, forcing America to confront the deep-seated prejudices that still poisoned its justice system. The Anderson twins had spent their lives fighting for justice in the courtroom. Now, they would have to fight for it from the other side of the law. But they were ready. They had been preparing for this moment their entire lives. As the cameras rolled and the world watched, Maya and Michelle steeled themselves for the battle ahead. The night was young, and their true test was just beginning. The story of the Anderson sisters was about to become legend. And it all started with a gunshot in a dark alley, on a night that would change everything. The harsh fluorescent lights of the police station buzzed overhead, casting an unflattering glow on the worn linoleum floor. Maya Anderson paced the length of the holding cell, her designer heels clicking a staccato rhythm that echoed her racing thoughts. Her sister, Michelle, sat perfectly still on the metal bench, her face a mask of calm that belied the storm raging within. "This is ridiculous," Maya muttered, running a hand through her meticulously styled hair. "We shouldn't be here. We need to be smart," Michelle interrupted, her voice low and steady. "Remember what Dad always said?" Maya paused, a ghost of a smile flickering across her face. "In the face of injustice, keep your head high and your wits sharp," she recited. It was a mantra that had carried them from the projects to the pinnacles of their professions. As if summoned by the memory, a flood of images washed over Maya. She saw their father, John Anderson, a postal worker with dreams bigger than their cramped apartment, hunched over the kitchen table, helping them with their homework. The smell of his coffee mingled with the aroma of their mother's cooking, creating a cocoon of warmth and safety in their small home. She remembered the pride in his eyes when they both got scholarships to law school, and the tear that rolled down his cheek when Maya was sworn in as district attorney. The memory of his weathered hands, calloused from years of sorting mail and taking on odd jobs to make ends meet, clapping louder than anyone else in the courtroom, made her heart ache. He hadn't lived to see Michelle ascend to the Supreme Court bench, but Maya knew he would have burst with pride. Now, standing in a cell that reeked of despair and disinfectant, Maya felt a surge of determination. They wouldn't let their father's sacrifices be in vain. Michelle watched her sister, reading the emotions playing across her face. "We're going to fix this," she said softly, her words carrying the weight of a promise. "Not just for us, but for every person who's ever been wrongly accused, every family that's been torn apart by a system that sees color before it sees humanity." Maya nodded, squaring her shoulders. "You're right. This isn't just about us anymore. It's about every John and Jane Doe who doesn't have the power or the platform to fight back." The sound of approaching footsteps snapped them back to the present. Officer Brennan appeared at the cell door, his earlier bravado replaced by a nervous energy that made him shift from foot to foot. "The chief wants to see you," he mumbled, not meeting their eyes as he unlocked the door. The metallic clang of the cell opening echoed through the quiet station, a sound that Maya knew would haunt her dreams for years to come. As they were led through the station, whispers followed in their wake. Word had spread fast about who they really were, and the atmosphere was thick with tension. They passed the desk where Officers Brennan and Rourke had booked them earlier, now conspicuously empty. Maya noticed a young officer watching them, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and fear. She made a mental note of his badge number, wondering if he might be an ally in the fight to come. The walk to the chief's office felt like a gauntlet, every step a reminder of the injustice they had faced. Maya could feel the eyes of the other detainees on them as they passed the holding area. How many of those people, she wondered, were also victims of a system that presumed guilt based on the color of their skin? The door to the chief's office loomed before them, the frosted glass bearing the name Chief William Harrison in bold letters. Brennan knocked once, then ushered them inside without waiting for a response. Chief Harrison was a bear of a man, his bulk straining against his uniform as he rose from behind his desk. His face was a battlefield of emotions. Anger, embarrassment, and a hint of fear warred for dominance. The office was a testament to a long career in law enforcement, walls adorned with commendations and photos of Harrison shaking hands with various politicians. "Ms. Anderson, Your Honor," he began, his voice gruff. "I cannot begin to express how—" "Save it," Maya cut him off, her tone sharp enough to slice steel. "What I want to know is how two of your officers managed to arrest a district attorney and a Supreme Court judge without so much as checking their IDs. Harrison's face flushed a deep red, the color creeping down his neck and disappearing into his collar. "There was a report of a robbery," he began, but Michelle held up a hand, silencing him as effectively as she did lawyers in her courtroom. A report that somehow justified the use of excessive force and blatant racial profiling? She asked, her voice deceptively soft. I'm curious, Chief Harrison. Is this standard procedure for your department? The chief's discomfort was palpable. He tugged at his collar, beads of sweat forming on his brow. Of course not, Your Honor. This is a regrettable incident, and I assure you there will be a full investigation. Maya leaned forward, her eyes boring into the chief's. Oh, there will be more than that, Chief Harrison. By sunrise, this regrettable incident will be front-page news. The question is, will your department be portrayed as part of the problem or part of the solution? A heavy silence fell over the room. Even the ever-present hum of the station seemed to fade away, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Maya could see the wheels turning in Harrison's head, weighing his options, trying to find a way out of this mess that would save his career and his department's reputation. Finally, Harrison spoke, his voice heavy with resignation. What do you want? The sisters exchanged another glance. Years of unspoken communication, allowing them to formulate a plan in seconds. They had prepared for moments like this their entire careers, but never had they imagined they'd be on this side of the table. First, Maya began, ticking off points on her fingers, Officers Brennan and Rourke are suspended, effective immediately. Their records will be thoroughly reviewed for any previous instances of misconduct. Harrison nodded, reaching for a notepad. The scratch of his pen on paper was the only sound in the room. Second, Michelle continued, her judicial authority evident in every word. Your department will undergo a comprehensive review of its policies and procedures, with a focus on racial bias and use of force. This review will be conducted by an independent committee which I will personally oversee. The chief's pen hesitated for a moment, but under Michelle's unwavering gaze, he continued writing. Maya could see the realization dawning on him. This wasn't going to be swept under the rug with a simple apology and a slap on the wrist for his officers. Third, Maya added, her voice steely, you will hold a press conference first thing in the morning. You will publicly apologize for this incident and announce the steps your department is taking to address systemic racism within its ranks. Harrison's face paled, but he nodded again. Is that all? He asked, a hint of sarcasm creeping into his voice. Maya smiled, but there was no warmth in it. For now, Chief. But make no mistake, this is just the beginning. We've spent our entire careers fighting for justice from within the system. Tonight has shown us that the system itself needs to be changed, and we intend to be the ones to change it. As they left the chief's office, Maya and Michelle could feel the weight of every eye in the station on them. But they walked tall, their heads held high, embodying every ounce of the dignity and strength that had carried them to the top of their professions. In the elevator, away from prying eyes, Michelle finally let her composure slip. She leaned against the wall, closing her eyes for a moment. Maya, she said softly, do you remember the night Dad got arrested? Maya felt a lump form in her throat. How could she forget? It was the night that had set them both on the path to law school, the night that had shown them the ugly truth of a system they had been raised to trust. He was just trying to help Mrs. Johnson after her son got picked up, Maya said, the memory as fresh as if it had happened yesterday. He went down to the station to sort things out and ended up spending the night in a cell because some rookie cop thought he was being aggressive. Michelle nodded, opening her eyes. There was a fire in them that Maya recognized. It was the same fire that had driven them both to excel, to fight, to change things from the inside. We swore that night that we'd never let it happen to anyone else, Michelle said. And now here we are. Here we are, Maya echoed, reaching out to squeeze her sister's hand. But this time, we have the power to do something about it. Ooh! The elevator doors opened, and they stepped out into the lobby. Through the glass doors, they could see a sea of cameras and microphones, the media circus having grown exponentially since their arrest. Maya squeezed Michelle's hand one last time, a gesture of solidarity before they faced the onslaught. As the doors opened and the questions began to fly, Maya stepped forward, her voice clear and strong. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Maya Anderson. I am the district attorney for this county. Tonight, my sister, Supreme Court Judge Michelle Anderson, and I were unlawfully arrested and detained by officers of this police department. A collective gasp went up from the crowd, followed by a barrage of questions. Maya held up a hand, silencing them as effectively as her sister had silenced the police chief. What happened to us tonight is not an isolated incident. It is a symptom of a deeper systemic problem that plagues not just this department, but our entire justice system. A system that sees color before it sees humanity, that assumes guilt based on appearance rather than evidence. As Maya spoke, laying out the events of the night and their plans moving forward, Michelle studied the crowd. She saw shock, outrage, and disbelief on the faces before her. But she also saw something else, a spark of hope, a hunger for change. In that moment, standing on the steps of the very institution that had wronged them, Michelle knew that their fight was just beginning. The path ahead would be difficult, fraught with resistance and setbacks. But as she looked at her sister, her voice ringing out with righteous indignation, Michelle felt a surge of determination. They had spent their lives working within the system, believing they could change it from the inside. Now, they would reshape that system, tearing down the walls of prejudice and rebuilding a true temple of justice. As the cameras flashed and reporters clamored for comments, the Anderson sisters stood united, ready to take on the world. The night that had begun with their unjust arrest would end with the birth of a movement that would shake the very foundations of the justice system and force a nation to confront its deepest, darkest biases. Maya concluded her impromptu press conference with words that would be replayed on news channels across the country. To every person who has ever felt powerless in the face of injustice, to every family that has been torn apart by a system that values procedure over people, we say this: your voices will be heard. Your stories will be told. And together, we will build a justice system worthy of its name. As they made their way through the crowd, dodging questions and camera flashes, Michelle leaned in close to her sister. "You know this isn't going to be easy, right?" she whispered. "We're taking on an entire system, centuries of ingrained prejudice and power structures." Maya nodded, her jaw set with determination. "I know. But if not us, then who? If not now, then when?" They climbed into the waiting car, the door closing on the clamor of the press. As they drove away from the station, the city lights blurring past the windows, both sisters were lost in thought, mentally preparing for the battle ahead. They had entered that alley as two successful professionals, secure in their positions within the system. They left the police station as revolutionaries, ready to tear down that system and build something better in its place. The night was far from over, and the Anderson sisters' fight was just beginning. But for the first time since those handcuffs had clicked around their wrists, they felt a sense of hope. Change was coming, and they would be the ones to usher it in. The battle lines were drawn. The Anderson sisters were ready for war. The dawn broke over the city, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, but Maya and Michelle Anderson had not slept. They sat in Maya's home office, surrounded by stacks of legal documents, empty coffee cups, and the soft glow of computer screens. The events of the previous night had set in motion a chain reaction that was already reverberating through the corridors of power. Maya rubbed her tired eyes, staring at the latest email from her assistant. "The governor's office has been calling non-stop," she said, her voice hoarse from hours of strategizing. "They're demanding a meeting." Michelle nodded, her normally immaculate appearance slightly disheveled after the long night. "I've got the Attorney General and the State Bar Association clamoring for statements. This is bigger than we anticipated, Maya." "Good," Maya replied, a fierce glint in her eye. "The bigger it gets, the harder it'll be to ignore." As if on cue, the TV in the corner, which had been muted but running constant news coverage, flashed with a breaking news banner. The sisters turned to see Chief Harrison stepping up to a podium, his face ashen and his uniform impeccably pressed. Michelle unmuted the TV, and Harrison's voice filled the room. "Last night, "An inexcusable error was made by members of our police force," he began, his words carefully measured. "Two respected members of our legal community, District Attorney Maya Anderson and Supreme Court Judge Michelle Anderson, were wrongfully detained. This incident has shed light on deep-rooted issues within our department and the broader justice system." Maya and Michelle exchanged a look. This was it, the first domino to fall. Harrison continued, outlining the steps they had discussed the night before. The suspension of Officers Brennan and Rourke, the impending review of department policies, and a commitment to address systemic racism within the force. As Harrison fielded questions from reporters, Maya's phone buzzed with an incoming call. She glanced at the screen and her eyebrows shot up. "It's Evelyn Grant from the Civil Rights Coalition," she said, stepping out of the room to take the call. Michelle turned her attention back to the TV, where political pundits were already dissecting Harrison's statement. The incident was being framed as a watershed moment, a catalyst for a long-overdue conversation about race and policing in America. Maya returned a few minutes later, her face flushed with excitement. "Evelyn wants to meet. She thinks this could be the push they need to get the police reform bill through the state legislature." Michelle nodded slowly, her judicial mind already analyzing the potential ramifications. "This could be our chance to effect real change, Maya. But we need to be careful. If we push too hard, too fast, we could face significant backlash." "I know," Maya agreed, sinking into her chair. "But we can't let this moment slip away. We need to strike while the iron is hot." The next few days passed in a whirlwind of meetings, interviews, and strategy sessions. The Anderson sisters found themselves at the center of a growing movement, their personal experience serving as a rallying cry for those who had long suffered in silence. Maya threw herself into working with the Civil Rights Coalition, using her position as district attorney to push for immediate reforms in police training and accountability. She spent hours poring over statistics, building a case that was impossible to ignore. Michelle, bound by the constraints of her judicial role, worked behind the scenes, reaching out to her connections in the legal community to build a coalition of support. Her measured, logical approach provided a perfect counterbalance to Maya's fiery passion. A week after the incident, they sat in the gallery of the state capitol, watching as legislators debated the newly introduced Police Accountability and Community Safety Act. The bill, which had been languishing in committee for months, had suddenly become the focal point of intense discussion. As they listened to the arguments flying back and forth, Michelle leaned over to her sister. "We're making progress," she whispered, "but we're also making enemies. I've been hearing whispers of a coordinated pushback from the police union and some of the more conservative elements in the state government." Maya nodded grimly. She had expected resistance, but the ferocity of the opposition had taken her by surprise. Just that morning, she had opened her email to find a thinly veiled threat from an anonymous sender, warning her to remember her place. The debate raged on, with supporters of the bill pointing to the Anderson sisters' experience as proof of the need for reform, while opponents argued that it was an isolated incident being blown out of proportion. As the session adjourned for the day, Maya and Michelle made their way out of the Capitol, flanked by a small security detail, a necessary precaution in light of the increasing threats they'd received. They were nearly at their car when a commotion erupted nearby. A group of protesters had gathered, holding signs with slogans like "Back the Blue" and "Anderson Sisters, Race Baiters." As the sisters approached, the crowd's chants grew louder. Maya instinctively stepped in front of Michelle, her eyes scanning the crowd. Most of the protesters seemed content to shout slogans, but there was an undercurrent of anger that made her nervous. Suddenly, a man broke away from the group, rushing towards them with something in his hand. Maya's heart leapt into her throat, but before she could react, their security team had intercepted the man, tackling him to the ground. In the chaos that followed, Maya felt a hand on her arm. She turned to see Michelle, her face pale but determined. "We can't back down," Michelle said firmly. "Not now. Not ever." Maya nodded, squeezing her sister's hand. As they were ushered into their waiting car, she caught a glimpse of the object the man had been holding. Not a weapon, but a photograph. A photograph of their father, John Anderson, with a red X drawn across his face. The message was clear. Their fight for justice had made them targets. As the car pulled away from the curb, leaving the shouting protesters behind, Maya's phone buzzed with a news alert. She opened it to find a statement from the police union, condemning the rush to judgment and defending Officers Brennan and Rourke as dedicated public servants caught in a political crossfire. Michelle read the statement over her shoulder, her brow furrowing. "They're circling the wagons," she said. "This is going to get uglier before it gets better." Maya nodded, a steely resolve settling over her. "Then we'll just have to fight harder," she said. "We owe it to Dad, to every person who's ever been wrongly targeted by the system. We can't back down now." As they drove through the city streets, both sisters were lost in thought, weighing the costs of their crusade against the potential for real, lasting change. They had known it wouldn't be easy, but the events of the past week had shown them just how deep the roots of injustice ran. The car pulled up in front of Maya's house, and as they got out, they noticed a small group of people gathered on the sidewalk. For a moment Maya tensed, expecting more protesters. But as they drew closer, she realized these people were holding candles, not signs. An elderly woman stepped forward, her eyes brimming with tears. "Thank you," she said, her voice quavering. "My grandson was wrongfully arrested last year. No one would listen to us. But you've given us hope." One by one, the others shared similar stories. Tales of injustice, of lives derailed by a system that saw them as suspects first and human beings second. Maya and Michelle listened, their resolve strengthening with each account. As the impromptu vigil dispersed, the sisters made their way inside. They were exhausted, both physically and emotionally, but there was a renewed sense of purpose in their steps. In the living room, they found Maya's teenage daughter, Zoe, watching a news report about the day's events at the Capitol. She looked up as they entered, her young face etched with concern. "Are you guys okay?" she asked. "I saw what happened outside the Capitol." Maya sat down next to her daughter, pulling her into a hug. "We're okay, sweetheart. It's just change isn't always easy." Michelle joined them on the couch, her judicial reserve softening as she looked at her niece. "Zoe," she said gently, "what your mom and I are doing, it's going to make things difficult for a while. There are people who don't want things to change, who are afraid of losing their power." "Oh," Zoe nodded solemnly. "I know, some kids at school have been saying stuff. Not to my face, but I hear them whispering." Maya felt a pang of guilt. She hadn't considered how their fight might affect Zoe. "We can stop," she said softly. "If it's too much, if you're not comfortable." But Zoe shook her head emphatically. "No way," she said, her young face set with a determination that reminded Maya painfully of her father. "What you're doing is important. I'm proud of you both." Michelle smiled, reaching out to squeeze Zoe's hand. "Your grandfather would be proud of you too," she said. "He always said that standing up for what's right isn't about being comfortable. It's about being on the right side of history." As the three of them sat there, the TV continued to buzz with updates on the Police Accountability Act, speculation about the Anderson sisters' next move, and debates about the state of race relations in America. But in that moment, surrounded by the warmth of family and the strength of their shared purpose, Maya and Michelle felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. They knew the road would be long and fraught with obstacles. The threats would likely increase, the opposition would grow more fierce, and there would be moments of doubt and fear. But they also knew that they were not alone. For every voice raised against them, there were many more offering support, sharing their own stories, and joining the fight for a more just system. As night fell over the city, Maya and Michelle Anderson prepared for another long evening of strategy sessions and legal research. But now they worked with renewed vigor, fueled by the knowledge that their fight was not just for themselves, but for every person who had ever been silenced, overlooked, or unjustly treated by the very system meant to protect them. The battle for justice had only just begun, but the Anderson sisters were ready. They had truth on their side, the law as their weapon, and an unwavering commitment to seeing their father's dream of true equality realized. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Two sisters united in their quest to bend the arc of history towards justice. As Maya powered up her laptop, ready to dive back into work, she paused for a moment, looking at a framed photo on her desk. It showed her and Michelle flanking their father at their law school graduation, all three beaming with pride and hope for the future. "We won't let you down, Dad," she whispered, tracing her finger over his smiling face. "We're going to finish what you started." Duel. With that, she turned back to her work, the sound of her typing soon joining Michelle's as they worked late into the night, laying the groundwork for a revolution in justice that would echo through generations to come. The tension in the air was palpable as Maya Anderson stepped up to the podium, the weight of countless eyes upon her. The Grand Hall of the State Supreme Court was packed to capacity, with journalists, activists, politicians, and citizens all crammed into the ornate chamber. This was the moment they had all been waiting for, the final hearing on the Police Accountability and Community Safety Act. Maya took a deep breath, her gaze sweeping across the room. She could see her sister Michelle seated among the other justices, her face a mask of impartiality, despite the personal stakes involved. In the front row, Maya's daughter Zoe sat beside Evelyn Grant from the Civil Rights Coalition, both of them offering encouraging smiles. "Your Honors," Maya began, her voice steady and clear, "we stand here today at a crossroads in our nation's history. The case before you is not just about a piece of legislation. It's about the very foundation of justice in our society." Oh! As Maya launched into her argument, her mind flashed back to the tumultuous months that had led to this moment. The late nights poring over legal precedents, the heated debates in community forums, the whispered threats, and not-so-subtle intimidation attempts. It had all come down to this. The Police Accountability and Community Safety Act is not an attack on law enforcement, as some would have you believe, Maya continued. It is a necessary step towards ensuring that our justice system truly serves all members of our community, regardless of race, ethnicity, or socioeconomic status. From the corner of her eye, Maya could see the opposition's legal team shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Led by the formidable Richard Hartley, a man known for his unwavering support of the police union, they had fought tooth and nail to block the legislation at every turn. As Maya delved into the specifics of the act, increased training requirements, stricter accountability measures, and an independent oversight committee, she could feel the energy in the room shifting. The justices leaned forward, their pens scratching furiously as they took notes. Just as Maya was building to her conclusion, a commotion erupted at the back of the courtroom. All heads turned to see Officer Brennan, one of the policemen involved in the sisters' wrongful arrest, stumbling down the aisle. "I can't do this anymore," he called out, his voice breaking. "I need to tell the truth." The Chief Justice banged his gavel, calling for order, but Brennan pressed on. "We were told to target them," he said, pointing at Maya. "The higher-ups knew who they were. It wasn't a mistake, it was a message." The courtroom erupted into chaos. Journalists scrambled for their phones. Photographers' cameras clicked furiously, and a buzz of shocked conversations filled the air. Maya stood frozen at the podium, her carefully prepared argument forgotten in the face of this unexpected revelation. Michelle's voice cut through the din. "Order!" she commanded, her judicial authority silencing the room. Officer Brennan approached the bench. As Brennan made his way forward, Maya could see the fear and determination warring on his face. She caught Michelle's eye, seeing her own shock mirrored there. This was a game-changer. For the next hour, the court listened in stunned silence as Brennan laid bare a conspiracy that went far beyond a single wrongful arrest. He spoke of systemic corruption, of orders from the highest levels to maintain the status quo at any cost. He named names, including high-ranking officials in the police department and state government. As Brennan's testimony concluded, Richard Hartley leapt to his feet. "Your Honors, this is highly irregular. This..." This confession hasn't been vetted. It could all be a ploy to sway the court's opinion. The Chief Justice held up a hand. Mr. Hartley, while the manner of this revelation is indeed unusual, we cannot ignore its potential significance. This court will recess for 1 hour while we confer on how to proceed. As the justices filed out, the courtroom once again burst into a frenzy of activity. Maya found herself surrounded by her team, all talking at once as they tried to strategize their next move. Maya! It was Evelyn pushing through the crowd. We need to get Brennan's statement to the press immediately. This could blow the whole case wide open. Maya nodded, her mind racing. Get on it, and find out if there are any other officers willing to corroborate Brennan's story. We need to move fast before the opposition can spin this. As her team dispersed, Maya felt a hand on her arm. She turned to find Zoe, her young face a mix of worry and pride. Mom, are you okay? Maya pulled her daughter into a tight hug. I'm fine, sweetheart. This is what we've been fighting for. The truth is finally coming out. Over Zoe's shoulder, Maya caught sight of Richard Hartley huddled with his team, their faces grim. She knew they would be working just as hard to discredit Brennan's testimony. The battle was far from over. An hour later, as the court reconvened, the tension in the room had reached a fever pitch. The Chief Justice cleared his throat, the sound echoing in the hushed chamber. In light of Officer Brennan's testimony, this court has decided to expand the scope of these proceedings. We will be calling for a full investigation into the allegations of systemic corruption within the police department and state government. A collective gasp went up from the audience. This was unprecedented. Furthermore, the Chief Justice continued, we will be admitting Officer Brennan's testimony into evidence for consideration in our ruling on the Police Accountability and Community Safety Act. Maya felt a surge of hope. This was more than they could have dreamed of. But her elation was short-lived as Richard Hartley approached the podium. Your Honors, he began, his voice dripping with condescension. While my opponents may be swayed by this theatrical display, I urge the court to remember the bigger picture. The Police Accountability Act, if passed, would cripple law enforcement's ability to effectively protect our communities. Are we willing to sacrifice public safety on the altar of political correctness? For the next hour, Hartley launched into a blistering attack on the act, painting a grim picture of a future where criminals ran rampant and police were powerless to stop them. He was good, Maya had to admit. He knew how to play on people's fears. As Hartley concluded, the Chief Justice turned to Maya. Ms. Anderson, in light of these new developments, do you wish to offer any final remarks? Maya stood, her heart pounding. This was it, their last chance to make their case. She approached the podium, feeling the weight of history on her shoulders. Your Honors, she began, her voice low but intense, Mr. Hartley would have you believe that this act is a threat to public safety. But I ask you, who is truly safer in a society where those sworn to protect us are allowed to act with impunity? Where corruption can reach the highest levels of our justice system without consequence? Maya paused, letting her words sink in. The revelations we've heard today only underscore the urgent need for this act. This isn't about political correctness. It's about accountability. It's about justice. It's about living up to the ideals that our nation was founded upon. She turned, addressing the entire courtroom now. We stand at a pivotal moment in our history. The eyes of the nation are upon us. With this act, we have the opportunity to set a new standard for policing in America. To say once and for all that no one, not even those who wear a badge, is above the law. Maya's voice rose with passion. This act isn't just about protecting minorities from unjust treatment. It's about protecting the very soul of our justice system. It's about restoring faith in the institutions that are meant to serve and protect all of us. She looked directly at the justices, her gaze unflinching. Your Honors, I urge you to be on the right side of history. Pass this act. Show the world that in America, justice is not just an ideal. It's a reality we're willing to fight for. As Maya returned to her seat, a hush fell over the courtroom. The Chief Justice cleared his throat. This court will now adjourn to consider our ruling. We will reconvene in 1 week's time. The next 7 days were a blur of media interviews, strategy sessions, and sleepless nights. Maya and her team worked around the clock, leveraging Brennan's testimony to build public support for the act. Michelle, bound by judicial impartiality, could only watch from the sidelines, her silent support a constant presence in Maya's mind. Finally, the day of the ruling arrived. As Maya took her seat in the packed courtroom, she felt a strange sense of calm. They had done everything they could. Now it was in the hands of the justices. The Chief Justice began to speak, his voice echoing in the hushed chamber. After careful consideration of all evidence and arguments presented, it is the opinion of this court that the Police Accountability and Community Safety Act is not only constitutional, but essential for the proper functioning of our justice system. A collective gasp went up from the audience. Maya felt tears pricking at her eyes as the Chief Justice continued. Furthermore, in light of the serious allegations brought forth during these proceedings, this court is recommending a federal investigation into corruption within the state's law enforcement and government agencies. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Journalists rushed for the exits, eager to break the news. Supporters of the act hugged each other, tears of joy streaming down their faces. Even some of the opposition looked shell-shocked, the magnitude of the ruling sinking in. Maya felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to see Michelle, who had stepped down from the bench. For a moment, the sisters just looked at each other, years of struggle and sacrifice reflected in their eyes. Then, propriety forgotten, they embraced. "We did it," Michelle whispered. "Dad would be so proud." As they pulled apart, Maya saw Zoe pushing through the crowd towards them. She opened her arms, enveloping her daughter in a fierce hug. "Is it over, Mom?" Zoe asked. Maya shook her head, a smile playing on her lips. "No, sweetheart. This isn't the end. It's just the beginning." Outside the courthouse, a sea of supporters had gathered. As Maya, Michelle, and Zoe emerged, a deafening cheer went up. Maya stepped up to the hastily assembled podium, Michelle and Zoe flanking her. "Today," Maya began, her voice carrying over the crowd, "we've taken a giant step towards a more just America. But our work is far from over. This act is just the first step. Now, we must ensure it's implemented fairly and effectively. We must continue to hold our leaders and our institutions accountable." She paused, looking out over the sea of faces. "To everyone who's ever felt powerless in the face of injustice, to every family that suffered at the hands of a biased system, this victory is for you. But more importantly, this fight is for you. And we won't stop until true justice is a reality for every American, regardless of race, regardless of status, regardless of zip code." As the crowd erupted in cheers once more, Maya felt a profound sense of both accomplishment and responsibility. They had won a significant battle, but the war for true justice was far from over. There would be resistance, setbacks, and new challenges to face. But looking at her sister, her daughter, and the diverse crowd of supporters before her, Maya knew one thing for certain. They wouldn't be fighting alone. A movement had been born, a spark of hope ignited. And from this spark, they would build a bonfire of change that would light the way towards a more just future for all. The Anderson sisters had set out to change the system. Instead, they had started a revolution. And this was only the beginning. The sun was setting over the city skyline, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, as Maya and Michelle Anderson stood on the balcony of Maya's apartment. A year had passed since the landmark ruling that had sent shockwaves through the nation's justice system. The sisters stood in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts, as they reflected on the tumultuous journey that had brought them to this moment. Maya took a sip of her coffee, her eyes scanning the cityscape. "You know," she said softly, "there are days when I still can't believe we did it." Michelle nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "I know what you mean. But then I look at the changes happening and I realize it's all very real." The past year had been a whirlwind of activity. The passage of the Police Accountability and Community Safety Act had been just the beginning. True to their word, the Anderson sisters had thrown themselves into the work of ensuring the act was implemented effectively and fairly. Maya had taken a leave of absence from her role as district attorney to lead a task force overseeing the act's implementation. Her days were filled with training sessions for law enforcement, community outreach programs, and endless meetings with stakeholders from all sides of the issue. Michelle, bound by her judicial role to maintain impartiality, had focused her efforts on education. She had become a sought-after speaker at law schools and judicial conferences, sharing her insights on the importance of accountability and bias awareness in the justice system. The sisters' work had not been without challenges. There had been resistance, sometimes violent, from those who saw the act as a threat to their power. Maya had faced death threats, and there had been a failed attempt to impeach Michelle from her position on the Supreme Court. But for every setback, there had been triumphs. Community police relations in many areas had shown marked improvement. Complaints of racial profiling had decreased, and there was a new sense of transparency in police departments across the state. Perhaps most significantly, the federal investigation sparked by Officer Brennan's testimony had led to a series of high-profile arrests and convictions, rooting out corruption at the highest levels of law enforcement and state government. As the sisters stood on the balcony, the door slid open behind them. Zoe stepped out, now a poised young woman in her first year of college. "Mom, Aunt Michelle," she said, "you might want to see this. It's all over the news." They followed Zoe inside, where the TV was tuned to a national news channel. The anchor's voice filled the room. In a historic move, Congress has just passed the National Police Accountability Act, largely modeled after the groundbreaking legislation first implemented in our state. This federal law will enforce standardized training, accountability measures, and community oversight for police departments across the country. Maya felt her breath catch in her throat. Michelle reached out, squeezing her hand tightly. The anchor continued, "Political analysts are crediting the tireless efforts of Maya and Michelle Anderson, often referred to as the Sisters of Justice, for paving the way for this national reform." Zoe turned to her mother and aunt, her eyes shining with pride. "You did it. You really did it." Maya pulled her daughter into a hug, her eyes meeting Michelle's over Zoe's shoulder. There were no words needed between the sisters. Their shared look said it all. This was everything they had fought for, everything their father had dreamed of. As the news continued to detail the implications of the new federal law, Maya's phone buzzed with an incoming call. It was Evelyn Grant from the Civil Rights Coalition. "Maya!" Evelyn's excited voice came through the speaker. "I assume you've seen the news? This is huge. We're already getting calls from activists in other countries wanting to know how they can implement similar reforms." Maya felt a flutter of excitement. "Are you saying this could go international?" "I'm saying this is just the beginning," Evelyn replied. "Your story, your fight, it's inspired people around the world. We're seeing movements springing up in countries on every continent. People are demanding change, and they're using your playbook to make it happen." After ending the call, Maya turned to Michelle and Zoe, her eyes wide. "It's going global," she said, her voice filled with awe and a touch of disbelief. Michelle nodded slowly, her judicial mind already racing with the implications. "It makes sense," she said. "Injustice isn't unique to our country. People everywhere are hungry for change, for a system that truly serves everyone equally." Zoe, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. "So what happens now?" Maya and Michelle exchanged a look, years of unspoken communication allowing them to reach a decision in seconds. "Now," Maya said, a familiar fire lighting up her eyes, "we keep fighting. This national law is a huge step, but it's not the end. There will be resistance, attempts to water down the reforms or find loopholes. We need to stay vigilant, to keep pushing for full implementation and continued improvement." Michelle nodded in agreement. "And we need to share what we've learned. If other countries are looking to us as an example, we have a responsibility to help however we can, while respecting their own legal and cultural contexts. Zoe looked at her mother and aunt with admiration. "I want to help," she said firmly. "I've been thinking. I want to go to law school. I want to continue what you started." Maya felt tears prick at her eyes as she pulled Zoe into another hug. "Your grandfather would be so proud," she whispered. As the evening wore on, the apartment became a hive of activity. Calls were made, plans were drafted, and a new phase of their journey began to take shape. Maya and Michelle, once again at the center of a whirlwind, felt a renewed sense of purpose. They had started this fight because of a personal injustice, but it had grown into something far bigger than themselves. They had become symbols of hope, their story a catalyst for change around the world. As midnight approached, the activity finally began to wind down. Zoe had fallen asleep on the couch, surrounded by notes and printouts. Maya gently covered her with a blanket before joining Michelle on the balcony once more. The city below was quiet, but to the sisters it felt alive with possibility. They had seen firsthand the power of standing up for what's right, of refusing to be silenced in the face of injustice. They had learned that change, real change, was possible, even in a system that seemed immovable. "Do you ever wonder," Michelle said softly, "what Dad would think of all this?" Maya smiled, her eyes misting over. "All the time," she replied. "But then I remember what he always used to say. Stand up for what's right, even if you're standing alone." The sisters recited together, their voices blending in perfect harmony. "We're not alone anymore," Maya added, looking out over the city. "And neither is anyone else fighting for justice, wherever they may be." As a new day dawned, Maya and Michelle Anderson stood side by side, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. They had started as two sisters fighting against a personal injustice, and had become the spark that ignited a global movement for change. Their journey was far from over, but they faced the future with hope, determination, and the unshakable belief that justice, true justice, was possible. As long as there were people willing to stand up, speak out, and fight for what's right, the dream of a fair and equitable system for all would never die. The Anderson sisters had rewritten their own story, transforming a night of injustice into a lifetime of purpose. And in doing so, they had given countless others the courage to rewrite their stories too. As the first rays of sunlight painted the sky, Maya and Michelle shared a smile. Whatever came next, they would face it together, as they always had. The Sisters of Justice were ready for their next chapter, and the world was waiting.